Hi everyone. We're very excited to start this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping rules. Your line's going to be muted. If you have a questions, please put it in Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will be recording this webinar, so you have a pleasure of sharing the recording with your friends and family. The theme of today is unpacking biohacking for longevity. And I'm very excited that we can actually, try to look at the biohacking from the scientific point of view. And your moderator today, Sergey Young, I'm a proud AFAR board member for the last 5 years. It's one of the most amazing parts of my life. I'm founder of Longevity Fund and the book author. Um, the host of today is American Federation for Aging Research. For the last, I think, 40 years, AFAR has been served as the largest talent incubator in the field. I think we provided almost like half a billion in dollars to more than 4.5 thousand scientists, entrepreneurs, institutions, and we continue to work on our mission to advance the science of healthy aging. We have a constellation of amazing humans and professionals today. Let me start with Daniel Belsky, Associate Professor of Epidemiology in Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. Dan is a developer of Dunedin-based biological age test and known for his work in biomarkers field. So we're going to be discussing this with Dan and other participants today. The next is my pleasure to introduce Mark Cotter, serial biotech entrepreneur and scientist, founder of two biotech companies, at least to the extent that I'm aware of, BeatBio and ClockBio, research professor at University of Cambridge Stem Cells Institute. We're going to be talking about epigenetic reprogramming and stem cells rejuvenation today. So it's very helpful that Mark has joined us today. The next is Helen Messier, Chief Medical Officer of Bioscope AI and educator of Institute for Functional Medicine. I personally know many people who changed their life and state of health because of the actual work they've done with Helen in her different capacity as a chief medical officer and a doctor. So I'm very excited we can bring the super practical aspects of it to our discussion. And Thomas Renda, our president of AFAR, role model for so many of us and me personally in the field. Tom is director of Broad Stem Cell Research Center and professor of neurology at UCLA. For our audience, the way we're going to run it today is we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so going through the two big buckets. One is the current state of aging research, entrepreneurship in the field, and its potential connection with biohacking. And the second part of this 30 minutes going to be we're going to try to take a look at the future and create a positive vision of what we can do in the next 5, 10, probably 15 years in the field of aging research and trying to fight age-related diseases as well. So let me set the stage. And when we talk about today, we see biohackers and influencers claiming this dramatic life extension, opportunities which will be available very soon. There are also conflicting views about what actually works and what doesn't work. Some people even kind of use gene therapies today. The other people would be concerned to do like a relatively simple and understandable lifestyle changes. So that's how controversial the field and idea of biohacking can be. So I'd like to start by exploring what is the evidence-based version of biohacking that we can all embrace. And my first question is to Tom. Tom, from your top-down view of the geoscience field, what would be your definition of biohacking? And uh, in terms of biohacking, approaches, which are the most evidence-based that you see, and which are far from scientific reality?
So thanks, Sergey. And it's a real pleasure to be here and sharing this webinar with this distinguished panel. It's a good question. And I think biohacking, if you ask people what their definition is, you'll get very different answers from different people. I mean, I even think of, conventional medicine as biohacking. We take drugs that make us healthier and probably extend our life. That's where but I think biohacking in the common parlance is more in the kind of do-it-yourself approach. And I mean, you mentioned, Sergey, I think kind of the range of approaches that, excuse me, that people take all the way from kind of lifestyle changes, and that's, exercising and dieting and, cold exposure, things that people try, all the way to the very extreme kind of biohacking that you mentioned, people using gene therapy or cell injections, things like that, so really, I guess it depends on when you say evidence-based, whether you mean evidence-based in humans versus evidence-based in animals, because there's certainly evidence in animals of interventions that extend lifespan. There's no evidence in humans that any of our interventions extend lifespan. There are correlations, and there's evidence of interventions that increase health, which presumably will extend health span and lifespan. But the idea of actually doing a study to understand whether an intervention extends lifespan is challenging because obviously you have to do this for decades and decades. It's extremely expensive. So the evidence really comes from either animal studies or correlative studies in humans. And I think, what people do is they go from kind of lifestyle interventions that I mentioned, but, nutritional interventions, or so-called nutritional biohacking, which is primarily in the form of supplements, which are unproven, that they extend lifespan or even health span. And, with that come dietary changes that people try, whether it's ketogenic diets or intermittent fasting, all with evidence in animals of benefits. So that's, I think a part of it. Now, part of it, of course, is the tech-based biohacking, which is, glucose monitoring and things that people are doing, their sleep monitoring, where they're getting information on their biology and on their health. The question then is, what do we do with that? When you have that information, what do we do with that in terms of, lifestyle changes or interventions? And then you get to the really extreme forms of biohacking that we mentioned, which are potentially dangerous and certainly unproven. People already trying to do infusions and, the idea of gene editing individually and things that people, may be thinking about and some people may be doing, clearly unproven.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. My next question will be to Mark. When I started to dig into the field of biotechnology and human biology and healthcare, I was actually impressed that many interventions, just through the history of healthcare and medicine, many intervention has been developed in a really conservative, incremental way, or sometimes even discovered as a side effect of completely different research. And all of us and in the audience, we can go on and on by quoting this example. So, Mark, do you think the real longevity breakthroughs will come from improving what we have, like repositioning all drugs and some other interventions available today, or given your interest in the work and new technologies, it can be completely new, entirely new field like epigenetic reprogramming, stem cells reprogramming, etc.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm on the conservative spectrum when it comes to these interventions that you just mentioned. So I think probably a gene therapy to extend a healthy life is a very risky undertaking. But I'm very optimistic that that we will find molecules, or we have found molecules that potentially have effects. And often these, as you mentioned, are the consequence of a side effect that was actually found. So one of the drugs that we use in clinical practice is rapamycin. Rapamycin has become, as you know, the anti-aging drug, at least in terms of animal experiments, etc. Still have to see whether this works in human beings. But that was actually used as a immunosuppressant for transplant treatments. So that this drug might have a beneficial effect on lifespan is not something that we expected. And I think there's a lot of unknowns to the drugs that we actually already use in clinical practice. We have ideas, concepts, we have reasons why these have been approved in clinical practice, but I mean, many of these have very different mechanisms that we think they have. Often they are not quite as let's say precise as we might think they do, and so I think we will discover more. For example, when we in my little spin-out, Bio did a screen to look at age modulation of FDA-approved drugs. We found that about 15% have age modulating effects, and 5% more than 10 years this is in vitro assay. So I think there's a lot of biology already out there. The other thing that I would say is that, at this stage, we're still grappling with age-related diseases, and when we just look at what we think conceptually about age, it's the confluence of aging hallmarks. So it's not one thing that goes wrong. It's sort of a few things, errors that accumulate across different parts of the cell. And when we look at our drugs, then actually what we see is that they often regulate just one of these or a subset of these aging hallmarks. So when we did a whole genome screen to look at age-regulating genes, we found about 150. And when we looked at the function of these, we saw that each of these mapped onto a subset of aging hallmarks. So there is no one gene that controls aging as a whole. And what that means is that you probably will see an acceleration of impact and also effect when you sort of start to think about combinatorial treatments. And we've seen this already. So there's obviously these are correlates. This is not life extension as such, but there was a study that looked at three conventional drugs, rapamycin, DHEA, not rapamycin, metformin, DHEA, and growth hormone. And actually, after 12 months of treatment, the biological age clock, the epigenetic clock, reversed by 2.5 years. The immune system function was improved. So I think this is very exciting. This is where I would be looking further, synergies across pathways. And, I think that's a part of the future. And by the way, I don't make a distinction between drugs and supplements because that's a regulatory distinction. It's not really a biological distinction.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's important in terms of defining the safety profile because it's a completely different, testing pathway both for, drugs and supplements. So at the end of the day, both things work, but like we have a different degree of evidence or understanding of the risk for supplements in comparison to like properly approved drugs as well. The question to our audience, guys, I have zero questions from you. I couldn't believe, it's there's nothing coming to your mind. So there's a special feature in Zoom. It's a Q&A chat. Please feel free to drop your questions there. I'm very excited to go through them. Otherwise, I'm just going to be asking my questions, all the time. My next question is to Helen. Helen, given your massive clinical experience in the field of longevity medicine and longevity healthcare. What has made the biggest positive difference for your patients? Like better diagnostics, lifestyle changes, therapies, supplements, and in other words, and I'm intentionally simplifying the things here. Like, what is number one overrated and what is number one underrated type of interventions that you use in your practice? And thanks for your questions, guys. I can see more and more coming. Yeah.
Okay, so Sergey, great to be here. I'm really honored to share the panel with our other panelists. But that's a big question, first of all. And, being on the front lines in clinical practice, I think what moves the needle more than ever is understanding, starting with the basics, right? Understanding the wisdom of the cell. I always ask kind of, the cell knows how to regenerate, our body knows how to heal. So you ask the question, what's there that shouldn't be there? Is there an infection, a toxin, or whatever? What's not there that should be there? Is there a nutrient they're missing? Is there, so you have to start to think with the basics, and then absolutely what moves the needle the most is going to be the lifestyle interventions. There's zero question about that. One of the things I see, obviously, have to start with sleep on everybody, because I find that sleep is really that underlying, if you had to put the pillars of lifestyle, I would put sleep on the bottom, because everything else kind of comes from that. If they have sleep, they want to exercise more. If they have sleep, they're more motivated to eat better, that kind of thing. But we live in a world of very chronic stress, right? So one of the things that's there that is so impactful negatively on people's health and longevity is really that chronic stress. That interrupts their sleep as well. And so, that I think we don't pay enough attention to the negative effects of that, how stress can drive inflammation, stress can drive mitochondrial dysfunction, stress drives telomere shortening, all of those things, the different hallmarks of aging. That's going to be the biggest driver, is helping people kind of identify and take action with that stress, right? I'm fascinated, we talk about the blue zones and the meaning and purpose in people's lives, right? And Stephen Cole's research on social genomics, right? I think this is really fascinating, how your social structure and stress and the feeling of where you are in life actually affects gene transcription in your immune system. And so we're starting to prove that out. So that's number one, is where I start with people. I think focusing on that. Now, there's some, definitely, I think it's really important to use diagnostics, but use them in a way so that you can target. Because again, the lifestyle things are across the board for everybody, but we're still genetically, biochemically unique. So how do we target what that individual needs? And that's the next step of where you go, right? And so using longitudinal biomarkers, I think, is becoming much more valuable. Up to now, our testing has always been kind of point in time. And so now we're at a stage, and with the help of AI, of course, we can start looking at much bigger data sets and longitudinal tracking and how that all fits together, so that we can start identifying things. I call it upstream medicine. How soon can we identify those things that are going to cause a problem? By the time you already have established heart disease or diabetes, that's way too late, right? I want to find things much earlier, and then we're going to have a much bigger effect. So, focus on the insulin resistance and the inflammation, and that's gonna really, again, you're going to control most of those with the lifestyle factors. But that was the first part of your question. I think what has too much hype, I think, is the second part, which, those other things, like there's all of the biohacking, all of that, there's a role for it. But again, it's, if you don't take care of the basics first, if you don't build that foundation first, it's like putting a drop of water in the ocean. It's not going to be that one thing that's going to create life extension. It's going to be these little things on top of the foundation that's going to make a difference.
Perfect. Thank you. It's just like the best context for the next question I wanted to address to Dan. Before that, I just want to integrate some of the questions that we have in the Q&A chat. What about, this is a question from Lin Chang. What about peptides? Any evidence, safety profile? Because it seemed to be like a recent hype. I even tried a couple of those, but my biggest concern would be like the source of production of it, because majority of them are produced outside the US, and lack of scientific, like proper scientific evidence of, for his substances. I'm not saying it's like good or bad, but I'm really curious from your experience, like what's the
Yeah.
comment on that?
Yeah, and again, when you say peptides, that's a very broad category. That's like saying pharmaceuticals. That's like saying, look, insulin is a peptide, right? GLP-1s are a peptide. We're starting to get evidence, and we know that they can work very well. They're signaling molecules, really, is what we look at that. So, do I think they have potential, a huge amount of potential, as we've seen with GLP-1s already, right? And the effect that they can have. At the same time, do we need more research on them? Yes, right. And anecdotally, I've seen them do great. I think, again, using that the foundation first approach, right, is really, really important. And then we need to capture it, right? Always know, and this is what, with every supplement, with any intervention you make, and this is what I teach our doctors as well, is what are you trying to treat? Why are you using that intervention? What are you testing to monitor whether that's having the effect that you want? And how are you analyzing whether it's actually working? So reassess where you're at with it. And I think that applies to everything, peptides, and if you throw everything at once all in and you don't monitor and you're just on this forever, I think that's not going to be the best approach.
Thank you. Um, the next set of questions is to Dan. And Dan, based on your research and data following uh, people for many decades, I think it's for as long as 50 years plus, right? For at least, 1,000 people. What are the most important biomarkers for tracking the pace of aging? And that's the first part of it. And the second part, I know you have an extensive use of different kind of gadget and wearables and sensors. You can see I am wearing Whoop, Oura Ring, Apple Watch, and do you think there will be a time in the nearest future where this whole thing can actually replace more, different tests like, blood work, CT scans, MRI?
Yeah. So the first question in some ways is harder than the second one. In terms of like what's the most important thing to measure, I don't think I know. I mean, our approach is to try and measure as much of the human as we can and integrate that information to establish the aging signal. In the scope of commonly measured clinical parameters, the ones that we find are most strongly related to our integrative composite measures of the pace of aging would include cardiorespiratory fitness. So you might see this as VO2 max on your watch readout or your Whoop readout. Pulmonary function, which we don't currently get from wearables, but doesn't seem in principle to be something that we couldn't get out of a remote device pretty easily. When it comes to blood work, glycated hemoglobin or HbA1c trajectories are extremely informative, and those you may be able to get out of your iPhone camera sometime in the near future, or perhaps there'll be a breathalyzer, but that stuff is coming to, digital monitoring space. It's probably already there in a basement somewhere in San Francisco. And then there's the kind of fancier molecular stuff that we could do. So we've spent a lot of time on DNA methylation, which is a molecule that lends itself to epidemiological research. We're probing its utility in clinical trials. I don't know what the future for DNA methylation will be as a sort of at-home consumer product that people can use to inform biohacking. It's the best the biomarkers of aging that we have today that have the best validation evidence, and as was pointed out, like we don't know. We don't have a validated therapy that slows aging, so we can't say, well, this biomarker responds to that validated therapy. We don't have clinical trials that have intervened successfully to prevent the incidence of multiple chronic diseases and can show that, some biomarker is a mediator of that treatment effect. So we are, we're still in the early days of validating these things. But given the available evidence, the epigenetic clocks, some of them anyway, I like to think ours is on this list, definitely Steve's Grim Age clock, are among the best validated biomarkers of aging for prediction of health span and lifespan. They're starting to show some evidence of being responsive in clinical trials, but I think it's uncertain as yet whether those are useful for consumers at home. People, of course, are using them. To the question of will we be able to replace this with digital stuff? I sort of hinted at this, but yes, my expectation is that in the relatively near future, much of what we would do with the blood test will be something that consumers could accomplish at home or with collaboration from a healthcare professional using digital tools, whether they're just a watch that's sensing things, or you're also interacting with your phone to take pictures of your eye or your hand or something else that we're measuring vascular function and perhaps some circulating biomarkers with.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. So I just want to integrate some of the questions that we have from the audience. And the first two probably a little bit more relevant for Tom and for Mark. One is, has there been any progress on the TAME trial, or is it dead in the water? And for our audience, the TAME trial is to basically kind of test metformin as a anti-aging drug for the lack of better word. And I think it's very emblematic on this one. The other part of it, and I think it's much broader than that, what are the current and biggest bottlenecks in longevity research? So it's I'll leave it to Tom and Mark to figure out if you want to address that.
Well, I'll go ahead and then start, and then Mark can I'm sure he has thoughts on this too. So the TAME trial is not dead in the water, but it's been a long time that funding has not come through to actually get it underway. I think, but the important thing that that trial did is it's focused attention on how do we do trials in aging? How do we do them? And I think that's kind of a key part of, the field right now. And you asked Sergey about bottlenecks. I mean, that's really kind of the major issue, and it relates to what Daniel was saying, is we don't have the right biomarkers. We don't have the right markers to say, we know this drug is working to have this lifespan extension or health span extension because we don't have validated biomarkers. So I would say that is the biggest bottleneck because we have lots of things to test and we have lots of people to test them on, and we just don't have the framework for the kind of trial that we want to do. But I think, moving forward from the kind of trials that were envisioned, like the TAME trial, I think there will absolutely be trials with biomarkers that are just accumulating across many trials that are being proposed as potential biomarkers that are predictive of disease. And, a lot of the focus, of course, in the general public is on lifespan. But if we can prevent and delay onset of age-related diseases, that would be huge. And I think, that's kind of a key aspect of what a lot of the panelists have talked about is we are talking about prevention. And that's also the real shift from conventional medicine to kind of thinking of lifespan and health span is it really is about prevention. And I think what Helen was saying, it's getting things set up so you don't develop diseases, not waiting until you do and then treating them. So Mark, you want to?
Thank you,
Yeah, I mean,
Mark.
I completely agree. I mean, interesting again, the TRIM trial was not meant to be a rejuvenation trial. And that was just chucked in at the end. And then, that provide maybe a potential explanation for why the immune system function has improved. I mean, there's lots of other constraints, very few people in that trial, I think 8 individuals that needs to be rolled up, of course, in a much larger cohort of individuals before this becomes evidence. There is efforts, however, just recently I came across the trial where supplements were tested in a more rigorous way and showed a slight delay. I think came out in Nature Medicine recently. And so I think the field is waking up to what you just said, Tom, a way of running trials and thinking about, how we could potentially project and measure, surrogates of longevity. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I just want to add something with some of these
Please.
trials. And I think the challenge is we're often testing one compound at a time, right? We're adding in metformin and we're just testing metformin. And, we know that it's never going to be just one thing. It's all of the things together that matter, right? We don't say, okay, just exercise, you don't have to worry about sleep or eating. We don't say, like, no, we say you need to do all of those, right? And I think when we're looking at additional, potential compounds that are going to increase lifespan, I think we have to start looking, number one, how do these interact together? And does that individual actually need it? So are we testing it in the right individuals? So a great example is, you see so many tests on vitamin D. And, yeah, vitamin D works in some people for increasing immune function and not in others. But we've never actually in those studies test their vitamin D levels before we actually give them the vitamin D. So does that actually, does it work in the people that are deficient and not the other ones? So I think we need to, do a like look at the people that are obviously in the trial, do think more holistically in how do these things interact and work together and then affect that individual.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. I just before moving to, I have a question both for Helen and for Dan from the audience, and I just wanted to offer my view on metformin. The good and bad news about metformin is it's a very old drug, and I don't know where I learned it, but I think it was for same trial or any other metformin related trial that placebo pills would be 2 times more expensive than metformin pills for the trial. So this is how inexpensive it is. So there's no economic model for investors, both from government side and from profit side, to benefit of rollout of metformin. I mean, some people would find this disappointing, but also this is like the way regulation and the whole system works as well. But I mean, I think it's an interesting question, and I also like the overarching theme of today's discussion, which is human biology is so complex. There's no way it's going to be one single intervention focused on one single tissue or the system which would solve the aging problem. Before moving to Dan, Helen, there's one question about role of nutrition there, and because the our perception of biohacking is more about technologies, something risky, optimizing, so many things through technology and diagnostics. So how do you sell the idea of fixing the basics, which is nutrition, diet, and sport, to your patients? Because, like, I'm in this field since 2018, much less than, any of you on this panel. And then, like, every time, I'm having discussion with someone, and they were like, "Oh, give me this kind of hot technology stuff or new scientific breakthrough to, like a magic pill." And when you start to talk about, sleep and the diet, people just literally checked out from the conversation.
Yeah, until you show them their markers. And
Okay.
then, so I think that's where it really comes, that's where the testing becomes really valuable. You mentioned hemoglobin A1C. I think that's a hugely valuable marker, right? When you show them that, hey, look at what's happening, look at the inflammation that's happening in your body, look at the insulin resistance you're developing, then you can actually start to convince them that, hey, there's no one pill or supplement or anything I can do that's going to be more impactful than you getting a good night's sleep every night and allowing your brain to clear out all the junk and the lymphatic. And so I think a lot of it comes to, everyone wants the sexy scientific thing. If you can actually explain to people why these things work. Why are we, what's the importance of sleep, right? Talk about autophagy happens and talk about lymphatic flow and talk about that matters. And so I think that combining the testing with the intervention is really, really impactful. And when then you can show that there's a change in what you're measuring, then they get convinced.
You know,
And
yeah, sorry,
yeah,
Helen, if I could just add to that. I mean, I think,
yeah, yeah.
one of the, it's not a mystery. It's just one of the, I think, underappreciated aspects of the interventions that we use that are drugs or supplements. They're basically fundamentally mimicking fasting and exercise. And I mean,
True.
if we,
Yes.
so I don't want to take the sexiness away from the advances, but really they're mimicking the things that we can do with lifestyle. Almost to the point, everything comes down to these pathways that are modified by diet, low diet, low calorie, fasting, and exercise. And
Yeah,
so, we need to make those things as sexy as the most recent GLP-1 agonist.
True.
exactly right.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. Before I ask the question to Dan, I personally believe this, devices coming from biohacking, which and interventions which are helpful to mimic the natural pathways to rejuvenate and even for reversing biological age, is a good way to attract to the field like a new generation, like for all of us, we can kind of listen, we can appreciate lifestyle changes. For some, and especially for younger audience, for them having device which will help them to meditate or put in, in particular positive mode for the improving the quality of sleeps might be just a good way for them to start their longevity journey. And this comes back to sensors and wearables, which Dan is one of the tools that Dan is using then you're using in your research and academic and entrepreneurial work as well. So the question is, how much of the monitoring and measurement is too much? Because sometimes when I have like a sleepless night, I don't look to my Aura Ring statistics because I know Aura will give me really, or Whoop will give me like really hard time for that, and it creates like a negative wiring for me as well. I don't know if you have a view on that just by working with so many patients for like so many decades.
Who was that directed to
Yeah,
for
it was for
Dan?
them. Yeah.
Dan.
Well, I don't
I'm
work with
sorry.
patients, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not a physician.
Okay.
Don't treat anyone.
Okay.
I think yeah. So maybe defer to Helen on answering that question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually it's interesting because you do have some people that, they're focused on it and you ask them, "How did you sleep last night?" And they go, "I don't know, let me check my aura," right? It's like, "Well, how do you feel?" I think look, I love the value of the data that we're getting from the wearables. One of the most impactful wearables I think are continuous glucose monitors, right? Where we can actually see in the past we used to do a first morning, fasting glucose, and we used to say that use that to diagnose insulin resistance. And at the same time, when we started using this continuous glucose monitor, we find that wow, lots of times people's sugar is high in the morning. It's not that they're insulin resistant; they're just stressed about getting a blood draw. And so you can start to see the impact of all of the lifestyle. The lack of sleep will cause your sugar to be higher the next day. When you're under stress, your sugar will go up. Like all of those things matter. So the data that you can get from the wearables are huge. And at the same time, I think it's taking away our own almost understanding of what's happening in our body ourselves, and we give that to someone else, right? Look, if you're tired, if you're wait, like, so I think we have to help people understand and learn to trust themselves as well. I think that it's a really important thing. So it's a bit of a balance, and sometimes I'll just tell my patients like just stop wearing everything for a while, right? And just see how you do. I used to have all of the rings and wearables. I'm always the first person to try everything, and now I don't have anything right now. So I think taking a break can be helpful too.
Okay, true. I agree. The question from Thomas, thoughts on the most interesting interventional medical devices, like the intervention which would use the like a hardware. Is any of you have thoughts on that? Okay.
I mean,
Uh,
maybe some cold water plunges. They seem to be causing positive reactions, and you might want to cool your water for that. But I don't know of any interventions that
okay.
devices.
Next question, and it's a question for Tom. Um, Many discoveries takes decades to reach patients, right? I remember I was reading an article recently that in the US it takes 17 years from something to be approved to like be available to the general public. That's a lot. Like when you go into the kind of clinic next door, it's very likely you're traveling back in time, like year 2000 in a way. Uh, do you see the like how we can speed this up, and do you see the role for biohackers and biohacking to speed this up in a way?
I mean, I think biohacking itself won't necessarily speed that up. I think
Mhm.
the way the kind of community effect can speed this up is by data collection. I mean, if the data that people are individually collecting can be pooled and can be analyzed, that's the way that we can sort of see from, go from correlations to causations. So I think that's the main way that the whole field of biohacking has an advantage to the community. I think individually, it's not. In fact, you could argue that people trying all these different things and, then they go into a trial, but they're, taking supplements here and so, that it's confusing the trial that you're trying to standardize. But I think the data that can be accumulated is what's the real value. So it's really the wearables and all that, and what Helen's talking about, the things that people can monitor, that can be collected and it can be correlated with supplements they're taking or pathways that are changing that might lead to, the kind of also what Helen mentioned, the kind of more personalized approach to interventions that can promote health.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. We have another excellent question. And this question is about the fact that today, the medical field today is so focused on particular like organs or systems that we all very specialized. And from my perspective, it was necessary to develop the sufficient level of knowledge to create improvements in the overall human health. But somehow, through the history of development of healthcare, through like centuries and even 1,000 years, we became so specialized. So we lose this holistic view of the human body and the complexity of the human biology. So the question that we have from audience: has the medical field started to change its kind of training and scientific approach for next generations of scientists and doctors to kind of teach and explore a more holistic view on the human aging, like and the way we can amend it or influence that?
I'm happy to take
Yeah,
this. So
go ahead.
I'm a neurosurgeon with a subspecialist interest in complex spine, and I focus on the neck. So you can see already how narrow and how specialized this is, my practice is. And I think that's where medicine is moving in a lot of ways. I think what happened, however, over the last 2 decades is that, or 1 decade, is that aging became a new thing to study. And a lot of people suddenly became interested. And some of the fundamental questions haven't been asked yet. The entire initiative of aging hallmarks brought together people. And I think when you look at the beginning of a science or a new field, it's very holistic. The problem is with time, it becomes then very fractured and becomes, everyone becomes a subspecialist of a subspecialist. So in some ways, I think the main discoveries will be many of the main discoveries and thoughts will be thought now, and that's just my opinion. But then when the scientific machinery starts expanding this, then it becomes very granular again, and that's sort of my observation.
Yeah, yeah. I think we have in medicine really, subdivided and subdivided into all the different specialties and organ systems. And, we need to remember that, the cell is the fundamental unit. And look, you can't separate the body, different parts of the body. We talk about brain inflammation or Alzheimer's, dementia. The head is not separate from the rest of the body. It's, if you have inflammation in one part of your body, you're likely to have it in the rest of your body. So you can't, but what happens is you'll have the dermatologist treating inflammation in the skin, and then, the next specialist treating it. And we use all of these different drugs to suppress symptoms when we really should be looking at what's driving that inflammation in the first place. Where is that coming from? And then let's address that. So I think, yes, that, specialization is really important in a lot of ways, but it is also has an effect of reductionism, and we lose how everything interacts with each other. So I think we need to, both is really important. The question is it changing in medical education? I'm not seeing it yet. I think a lot of that thought process comes after you graduate from medical school and you get out there in the real world and you see the need for what's going on with your patients, and you start thinking differently.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I'm a neurologist by training and have always been and taught at medical schools. And, medical curricula are just very, very slow to change. And, these things do creep in, but, it's a lecture here, a lecture there. And, in the defense, of course, and I joke with my ophthalmology colleagues that, you start off as an eye doctor, then you become a front of the eye or the back of the eye doctor, and the front of the eye doctor is the front of the eye, et cetera. But if you have a cornea problem, you want a cornea specialist, and that's what we train. And so I see the medical education aspect of this as being very slowly integrating these things into general practice, certainly into geriatrics, but even into pediatrics. Really thinking early in life, what you do early is going to have an effect later. And so I think that thinking is permeating, but there are no, to my knowledge, at least I'm speaking in the US, medical curricula that have really integrated that holistic approach at the expense of the more specialized education.
Thank you. And I want to thank Dan for answering the questions in Q&A section. This is great. Thank you. I just want to, can I ask each of you to answer the question, like, probably within the minute interval. So if we look at 10, 15 years from now, and for example, we've visited the most advanced longevity clinic in 2040, what would be happening there? That it's not possible today, either in the context of your research and your work or in the broader longevity and aging research context. Yeah. Who wants to start?
I'll give it, I mean, I think, a lot of what's been said is that first of all, patients are much more educated and they will become increasingly educated. And in a way, the profession will change because patients will come in with information and ask, and then the doctor will have to go look up, what do I do? And it will become more and more personalized. And I think, that will be a really advantage to have people come in with their genome sequence, with their data applied, and then the treatments will be much more personalized. So I think we don't do that now. We try to do that, and there's some personalization. But if you have high blood pressure, you get a drug, probably based on side effects, but not really targeted to you specifically. So I think the data that patients will bring to the clinic will be analyzed by AI for sure, and the doctor will have a partner, which is an AI partner, to help really with that. So I think we're starting to see little bits of that, but I think that will be the norm in
Mhm.
2040.
Perfect. Thank you.
The
Yeah.
other thing,
Go ahead.
sorry. The other thing that I think I'm excited about is, and I'm going back to this TRIM trial because it's really difficult to wrap your brain around this. It's a combination of three drugs that, were more or less randomly assembled, as far as I understand. And suddenly we see something that we've never seen before, a biomarker of aging reversing. So I think this idea of polypharmacology, of multiple drugs that basically together are able to do something that not a single drug can do. I mean, we know quite well what metformin does, half a year, in terms of delay in healthy, extraordinary effects, of course, with individuals with diabetes. I think it can correct life expectancy in patients with diabetes. But when we look at the confidence of different drugs, and who knows? I mean, what we can, and of course, I also agree with the personalization. What I'd really like is a test that tells me my damage patterns across the aging hallmarks, because that is probably something that we could act on.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. And then I'll
Yeah, yeah.
the same
I
question
was
to Dan.
I
Yeah.
think there's going to be, the 2040 is not that far, but look at how fast AI is happening. And it's just, are doctors going to even be there in 2040? I don't know. But I think, this real-time monitoring, doing longitudinal, in-time, real-time, proteomic, metabolomic, wearable monitoring, not this snapshot dynamic, so that we can move everything as far upstream as possible. So now you've got AI helping you analyze all these complex data sets. And you're now going to say, not just earlier diagnosis, but are you on a trajectory for developing an inflammatory, disease in the future, 15, 20 more years before? And we're going to be able to give very personalized interventions for that, that individual on what's happening in their body right now, predicting the trajectory they're on, and knowing the most impactful intervention that can change that trajectory. I think
Mhm.
that's where we will be, probably even before 2040. And I hope what will also be there is that this becomes democratized, right? That this is not just the wealthy biohackers, that everybody, this will be how we do primary care.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Dan, please.
Well, I agree with much of what's been said. I think that certainly the AI companion and the ongoing integration of electronic health record information into specific recommendations for patients is going to be a thing that goes live in this democratized way. Like we're going to have that. Um, we're not going to, I would bet against any democratization of this sort of ultra precision health support that will be available in your, world's best longevity clinic in 2040. But the capacity to make, in the question and answer section of the webinar, a lot of people are asking, like, what should I do? Like you said, diet and exercise, specifically what diet and exercise,
Mhm.
exactly what kind of sleep, when. And the answers to those questions we know already are likely to be different for different people. And right now, you got functional medicine, longevity medicine, concierge medicine, whatever we call it, kind of feeling around a little bit in the dark, trying to figure out what's going to work for this person, mainly trial and error. Uh, I think that'll be solved in a really important way, as Helen said, likely before 2040. So we'll be able to give much higher impact and much more specific guidance to people about the kinds of lifestyle behaviors you're going to use. The other thing that we're going to have by 2040, or I should retire, quit, and disgrace or something, is we should have real biomarkers of aging that we can use to
Mhm.
evaluate therapeutic impacts in clinical trials. And that's going to arm longevity medicine with a whole new toolkit of interventions beyond that precision diet and lifestyle work that can enhance, what the clinic will be able to offer its patients.
So can I just
Amazing.
chime in? I mean, so
Please.
I agree with Dan on the point that for the educated public who are doing all this stuff, what should I do is a very nuanced question. For public health, lose weight and get some exercise. I mean, that just as a start is huge, right? I mean, that's already across the board.
Yeah.
Start with that, not for an individual, but for public health is
Yeah.
is the way we need to start. There's no doubt that losing weight and getting some exercise, some walking is already a path towards a healthier population than what we have now.
Very
Sure.
true.
Yeah, you can see this panel on this audience are used to the idea of longer living. It's been already 55 minutes down the 1 hour road that we're done, so we need to conclude. Another final question to each of you, and it's a pity we couldn't kind of handle all the questions in the Q&A. I mean, it's exciting, so many things that you raised. From your perspective, how should be what are the tests, what are the approach that people should use to distinguish like what is credible and what is still a hype or early and risky undertaken intervention. I'm not seeking for medical advice, like just to start, I have my own rule. If this hasn't been in use for the last 10 years, I'll rather wait, okay? Because statistics and years of implementation of particular interventions takes out, it shows a lot of upside and downsides risk within the at least 10 years road to be used for the public health. Are any other rules or advice that we can give to our audience today on how to distinguish one from another?
My biggest rule is who's benefiting financially from that claim? Like always look at, right, who's saying that this is the best thing, this is the biohack, this is like follow the money is number one. What do other independent people, scientists that are not part of that group selling whatever that product is, what do they say? Ask for, don't just dismiss. We have to get the full picture. So don't just trust what you hear by an influencer, there's always an underlying motivation. So I think that's kind of your number one determiner. I always also look at what's the risk versus benefit of this.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's a huge drug that's going to have all of these effects, there could be a lot of side effects. It could be a high risk intervention versus, hey, maybe if I get a little more sleep and exercise and control my stress, it's pretty low risk with potential huge benefit. So always look at the risk benefit. Adding a supplement, maybe that's lower risk. Can you try it? So I always look at that as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Who's next?
I mean, I'll just say a couple of simple things. To me, how to spot hype is when, first of all, any claim that this is going to help you live longer is unproven. So the claims that number one, it will increase your lifespan or it will treat, all of these different diseases is something to be suspect about. So I think you can already see those. Otherwise, it's tough. I mean, I think, one of the things I'll give a plug for AFAR here, American Federation for Aging Research, because, we do like to think that we are kind of a guardian of the, of what you can believe and what you can't. Now, we don't have a website where you can ask that question, you'll get that answer. But I would say find the trusted sites, go there and see what is being advocated as advantageous, what is risky, what's proven, what's unproven. I just think you need to find, your doctors, obviously, but you need to find a trusted site. You can't trust what you're reading and what's being claimed.
Perfect. Thank you. Dan?
So I would add to AFAR, you've got the Academy for Longevity Medicine, and there's another international body that is spinning up. So keep your eye out for these professional societies of physicians working in this space. They do issue guidelines. I think I would encourage people to look for interventions that have demonstrated evidence of moving clinical endpoints and not just biomarkers. We've talked about this a little bit, but we're now in a world where you can test your new therapy against a zillion different biomarkers that all claim to measure aging, and you can find one that responds the way you want it to, and then you can advertise on it. And as a consumer, that's not a good starting point. You want to see people putting up evidence that real things that can be measured can be moved, and ideally that they have managed to publish that evidence in a peer-reviewed outlet. If you don't feel comfortable diving into the scientific literature, then of course defer to the experts. And always, I think I add, consult your personal healthcare providers about the wisdom of undertaking any of these interventions because they'll have valuable input for you.
Amazing. Thank you, Dan. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. A trusted source, peer-reviewed literature, an outcome that you can that has impact relate to. Yeah, I think that those are the two important components. The numbers that are behind the studies is an important component, as you said, Sergey, because you might have one study showing something, another study not showing something. So unfortunately, it's not that easy. But there are also interventions where you might not need this. Get a good night's sleep, and listen to your body, how you feel. Do some exercise, drop your weight. I mean, all of these things you can measure already. So I think it's difficult, but some common sense things that are reappearing, I think, are things one should focus on.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Look, in the end, we are in the end of our hour. I couldn't even believe it. I just want to continue this conversation almost forever. If there is one thing to desire immortality, I'm not a fan of immortality. It's just to have conversations like this on and on. So thanks to all our participants and our audience. AFAR will share recording of this webinar on our website, on social media. Follow AFAR for updates for future webinars and or for the recording of it on the social media. And finally, your donation is important. So if you want to help AFAR to support our mission, go to afar.org and help to donate in a big or small way. It doesn't matter. Otherwise, thanks for your time today. Thanks, everyone. I really enjoy it. Hope you too. And stay healthy and happy.